My name is Jenn Fontaine. I live in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. I have 4 children. My birth journey started 21 years ago with the birth of my twin boys. I am now a birth doula, a postpartum doula, a breastfeeding educator, a childbirth educator, and a birth doula trainer. In the past few years, I've really shifted my focus to look at abuse survivors and trauma and how that can impact pregnancy, birth, and postpartum. I grew up in a home that took in foster kids my entire life. I clearly saw the effects of abuse and trauma and how that played out in childhood. I didn't really connect how that abuse can lead to issues in pregnancy, birth, and the postpartum period. And it wasn't until I read the book, When Survivors Give Birth by Penny Simkin and Phyllis Klaus, that I really connected the dot. This is an 8-hour course that I teach, and I'm going to give you a really quick 20-minute snippet of that. So how common is childhood sexual abuse? This is difficult to determine accurately. It's a taboo subject shrouded in secrecy, shame, threats of harm, and disbelief. There are inconsistencies with the definition of sexual assault. Sexual abuse is something that happens in every community around the world. It is not restricted to any one people group, any one income bracket, any one religious group. It really is widespread across the world and something that we as doulas really need to be aware of so that we can support our clients. We can't stick our heads in the sand and just pretend this won't happen to anybody that I will be dealing with. In over 90% of cases, the perpetrator is known to the child victim. The World Health Organization defines child sexual abuse as the involvement of a child in sexual activity that they do not fully comprehend, that is unable to give informed consent to, or for which the child is not developmentally prepared. There are different types of abuse. We're not going to get into all the different types of abuse, of course, today, but we want to recognize that there are different types: physical abuse, emotional abuse, neglect, sexual abuse, and exposure to family violence. Why do we want to put so much focus on the child, and what does it matter when this abuse happens? This takes us back to the beginning and the developing brain of a child. The child's brain is malleable, so what they are learning, if they are constantly adapting to threats, it takes lesser and lesser of those threats for that child to react, for that teenager to react, for that adult to react. Constant adaptation to danger in order to survive leads to the inability to turn off these adaptive responses later when there is no danger. Repeated activation of stress response system from trauma at a young age when the brain is still developing can cause a cascade of altered receptors, sensitivity, and dysfunction throughout the brain. Our brain's stress response systems carry information about potential threats and are primed to respond to them as quickly as possible, which often means before the cortex can consider what action to take. What this means is early exposure to trauma can have a lasting impact throughout the lifespan. Previously stored experiences lay down the neural networks that we can use to make sense of incoming information. Sexual abuse in children often shapes their early assumptions and understanding of life. They believe that life is dangerous, the child is powerless, trust, love, and self-esteem may be unknown or threatened. Let's look at the long-term effects of abuse on adult behavior. Constant fight or flight response, perhaps PTSD, hypervigilance, tension, anxiety, overinterpretation of events and words as threatening, behavior, impulsivity, emotional volatility. So thinking about how childbirth is already a really stressful time for people, when we add these things to it, we can see that this is going to be an incredibly challenging thing for the survivor. There are some life events that can trigger memories. Entering a monogamous sexual relationship or marriage, pregnancy, birth, postpartum, and the breastfeeding period, when her daughter or granddaughter reaches the age where she herself was abused, the perpetrator dies, other times of unusual stress, after disclosure by others who were abused by the same offender, and after media coverage of child abuse. Media coverage lately has been talking a lot about sexual assault, childhood sexual assault, and adult sexual assault. It's amazing that we are starting to open these doors and have these communication and expose what is happening, but it can be extremely triggering and hard for the person who has experienced this in their life. When it's coming up at a time in pregnancy, we have that added impact of stress that we need to help people have coping skills for so that they can be supported and feel secure during this time instead of just re-triggered and re-traumatized. How often does sexual assault happen? This is something we as doulas need to have an understanding of. Well, 1 in 3 women and 1 in 6 men are sexually abused before the age of 18. 93% of offenders are male. Have you as a doula ever encountered somebody with an inability to tolerate vaginal exams, blood draws, extreme modesty, lack of trust of medical and other authority figures, detailed lengthy lists of requests, unexplained failure to progress, profound disappointment with their birth? Remind yourself that there might be more than what you're seeing on the surface. We don't need to know why people are having the reactions and behaviors that they do. What we need to do is understand that they have a good reason for doing so. Support them. Help them have those community resources. We know that a caregiver's stress can impact the baby. The problem with telling people this is they often get stressed about being stressed. It is usually far better to help people figure out what helps them be calm. How can they regulate themselves? Self-care is amazing. Self-care might mean taking a bath, taking a walk, breathing, doing prenatal yoga, those kind of things. Self-care in the media often means buying $500 shoes and spending the day at the spa. We want to give people realistic things that they can do to help regulate themselves and be calm so that we can not be passing that stress onto baby. Questions like, who can you talk to when you're upset? Can you add a 10-minute walk in your day? Brainstorm how to deal with stress in productive ways instead of telling people how bad stress is for their baby. The stress and trauma can come through into our parenting, and we have such dysfunctional societies when we ourselves cannot be whole. There's help. Not everyone who's been abused is going to go on and have this dysfunctional life, but we need help and we need the support of our communities. The human responses to trauma, sexual disorders, physical and mental problems, trauma comes out in some way. It might be stomach aches, headaches, anxiety, physical and mental problems, psychosocial problems, mental health disturbances. When people have traumatic stress, their brains can become familiar to future stresses, and it takes smaller amounts of stress to trigger the system and promote a bigger stress response. What can the impact of trauma have on pregnancy? Let's look at 4 areas. 1, sexual. Fear of permanent damage during birth, finding the focus put on sexual parts of the body to be disturbing, having phobias of needles, vaginal exams, and invasive procedures. 2, the physical and mental impact. Exaggerated symptoms of pregnancy, a rejection of body changes, gestational hypertension, fertility problems, preterm labor. Number 3, psychosocial issues, bonding issues, desire for abortion, strained relationships, mistrust or overdependence on caregiver, fear of loss of control, intimate partner violence. 4, mental health, fear of birth pain, fear of not being a good mother, reoccurrence of sexual abuse memories, anxiety, depression, gender preference for baby or caregiver. Can trauma affect childbirth? Absolutely. Fears of being naked, giving up control. We often hear people say you need to give up control in labor. That can be an incredibly scary thing for anyone, never mind the abuse survivor. A lot of language that we use surrounding birth can be especially harmful for the abuse survivor. Things like, be a good girl. If you just relax, it won't hurt as much. We need to come up with other ways in our language to help moms be more calm and relaxed and supported during labor without saying sentences like that. Something like trust your body that we see a lot on birth affirmation sheets can be really hard for somebody who feels like their body has betrayed them. Their body grew those breasts that were then used in abuse. They've had repeated miscarriages. For these women, trust your body. If you're saying that to them, they often feel like that must resonate with a lot of people. It doesn't resonate for me. So it continues to help them feel isolated and alone instead of encouraged by those statements. Things like, you're doing wonderfully. I'm here to support you. Those are things that can be much better to say. I challenge you to think about what you're saying to people in labor. Trauma can continue on and impact the postpartum period. Breastfeeding can be an awful or healing experience for abuse survivors. Worry about what's appropriate when touching baby's genitals. Sexual dysfunction, feelings of failure in the birth, anger, blame, self-image issues, seeing the baby as a perpetrator, problems with the partner, problems with grandparents, especially if one was the abuser, parenting issues, an increased exhaustion, loss of appetite, prolonged recovery, and newborn failure to thrive, colic, breastfeeding failure, PTSD, re-traumatization, depression, anxiety, and postpartum mood disorders. When people say they are scared of childbirth, instead of dismissing what they're saying by saying, oh, everyone's scared of childbirth, ask them some follow-up questions like, can you tell me what it is that is making you feel afraid? Can you tell me why you feel the way that you do? Asking those open-ended questions opens the door for communication and helps somebody feel heard instead of feeling dismissed. I would like to mention that there are other types of abuse: emotional abuse, physical abuse, psychological abuse, as well as economical abuse. Economical abuse is something that we often don't think of when we make judgments, when we see people. You might think, this mom is able to afford the services that I am offering to her. This mom is able to afford the resources that I am giving her, but she might not have access to any of the funds in the household. We need to make sure that when we're giving resources to people, that we are making sure that we're including some that have no cost attached to them so that they can be accessible to everyone. This is associated with low birth weight, low maternal weight gain, maternal infection, anemia, drug and alcohol abuse, birth defects, miscarriage, stillbirth, homicide, attempted suicide, and other self-injurious behavior. What can we do? I don't want you to leave with the message that the world is doom and gloom and there's nothing that we can do to support women. 1, become a better listener. We don't need to know if somebody is an abuse survivor before treating them with dignity and respect. Everyone should be treated with dignity and respect. If someone does disclose abuse, past or present to you, believe them. Listen to them, support them. You do not need to know all the details. You do not need to dig in the history of everything that happened with that situation to be able to support this mom. We can listen, we can hear people. This is something as a society that we don't do very well. We tend to talk over people. We tend to say, oh, I know somebody who experienced that, instead of really listening and allowing them to tell their story in their own words. Listening to someone is the best way to give the message that you are of value, and everyone deserves to feel that they are of value. Continue those questions. What are you doing to take care of yourself? What have you noticed that helps when you are stressed? Those kind of questions create the space for people to tell their story in their own words. What can we do to help abuse survivors during this period? Helping them feel adequately prepared for labor. Knowing really good evidence-based community childbirth classes that these moms can go to get a good sense of what's going to be happening to her, how her body is going to be working, how she can work with her body, and have that added support. We know that the birth has a lifetime effect on people. How they are treated, do they have a say in the process? So helping people understand what is going on in that hospital can really bring down that stress level and help them not be re-traumatized. We know that how someone is treated, and if they have a say in the birth process, has a lasting effect. We as doulas can help with both of those things. Sometimes pain medications are the right choice for pain reduction, and sometimes that's not the right choice if a mom feels disconnected from the body and that connection. Helping her explore what she thinks and have realistic expectations about birth and her place of birth. People may not be aware of how things are connected. No pain might sound great. However, what comes along with it, the continuous monitoring, an IV, being connected to things, might not be fully understood. The doula can be a wonderful tool for this client. They have a singular focus with no hidden agenda. Their only agenda is to fully support this client throughout this entire process. Doulas are trained in active listening. They may have an established relationship. They are experienced with different forms of comfort measures. They can help the woman to communicate her needs. There is continuous support before and after the birth. Let's talk for a moment about a birth plan. Some people feel that the birth plan is a 4-letter word. Plan is a 4-letter word, but where did it come from and how has it gone so wrong? This is a communication tool. You can call it a birth plan, a wish list, a preference sheet, whatever thing works for you. We know that when some people write things down, it becomes stuck in their mind. It has to happen this way, and they lose their flexibility. We know that for others, writing it down helps them think, I don't need to be thinking about this during the birth. I've communicated what's important to me, so I can let that go out of my mind and just focus on laboring right now. Should people need to disclose things on a birth plan for things like the door to be closed, for the mom to be covered up, for things to be said to her and asked before things are done? No. But sometimes it's easier to do that when we understand why somebody is asking those things. This is 100% up to your client to decide if they want to disclose. Birth can be triggering. A trigger is a specific action, event, or other factor that causes anxiety, fear, anger, tension, resistance, brings up memories or flashbacks of abuse. There are some major trigger themes. Loss and loss of control. This would be pregnancy, birth, and postpartum. Pain, injury, bodily damage, invasion. Dependency on the partner, caregiver, or doula. Distrust of authority figures and strangers. Take a second and just think about the power dynamics and the differential there in birth. This mom is often laying down with somebody standing over her. She's often feeling exposed, or completely is exposed in this moment. That can create great fear. Being exposed itself is a trigger theme. Does this mom need to be exposed this entire labor? Can she wear clothes that she feels comfortable and confident and not so vulnerable in? Knowing what is optional in your hospitals and really advocating for moms to be able to wear their own clothes can be a really positive thing to aid in the feeling of feeling more in control and lessen that power differential and that vulnerability in this birth. Feeling judged is also another trigger. So that's wonderful that us doulas offer non-judgmental support to these families. When you, the doula, are a survivor, have your own support system. Do not project your issues or solutions onto your client. They may handle things differently. Even if somebody has lived parallel situations to what you've experienced in your life, you can't say the words, I understand how you feel. You don't. They may feel completely different than you felt in those situations. They may handle things completely different. So listening to them and not projecting your own solutions and your own story on others is how we can help that survivor. Listen with empathy. Help her identify concerns and solve them together. Be aware if you're triggered. If so, pause, breathe, do your own self-reflection, seek mentorship, and evaluate if you're still able to help her. The most traumatic aspects of all disasters is the shattering of human connections. Recovery from trauma is about relationships, building trust, gaining confidence, having a sense of security, and connecting. We need to build a healthier society. In my maybe naive way, I feel like one empowered mom giving birth can make amazing decisions for herself, feel good about those decisions she's making, and then carry that into her parenting and her postpartum period. A well-supported society is going to change the world. In order to keep children safe, we need to form healthy relationships and connect with others. In order to keep children safe, we need healthy, happy, whole societies. Moms need support after the birth of their babies. We were not meant to do this as an island. Moms need to understand the needs of infants. They need to be held. They need to be attached. They need to attune to their needs so that these children can feel secure and have those healthy attachments with their parents. We can make a lasting difference in the short time that we have with these parents through listening, support, resources, advocacy, hearing what she has to say.